Good morning, everybody. Thank you to those of you who are with us here today and those of you who are joining us virtually. I'm Kristen Panerali from the World Economic Forum, and this panel is about advancing clean power and electrification globally. Now, the 2020s need to be the electric decade if we are to keep global temperature increases anywhere near below 2 degrees. And this clean energy transformation is necessary not only for climate, but also for energy security and to face those challenges about affordability and access that we are seeing around the world also. Now, all the different scenarios require similar goals, and there's three of those that I want to highlight right now. The first one is that clean power has to scale threefold by 2030. The second is that the demand side transformation across transportation, industry, and the built environment needs to be far more efficient and far more electric. Now, where we're at right now is that final energy demand is at 20% electric. By 2030, that percentage needs to increase to 30%. And by 2050, it has to be in the range of 50 to 70% of final global energy demand met by electricity. And all of this needs to be supported by more investment in the grid, in transmission, and in distribution. I am really thrilled to have this panel with leaders from around the world. And what I hope that this dialogue will focus on are those actions that are happening right now and that are needed in order to accelerate the transformation that's needed. So I'm going to introduce our panelists right now. I will start with Amani Abou-Zeid, the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the Africa Union. Thank you for being here. We have Leo Moreno, who is the President of AES Clean Energy. And we have Claudio Facchin, who is the President of Hitachi Energy. And we are awaiting one more panelist who I will introduce when he arrives. I think that he is finding his way here. And so with that said, I will kick things off with you, Commissioner. So we're going to do a round of questions just to do some scene setting, and then we'll move into a more interactive dialogue. So, Commissioner, I have a question for you here about the $4 trillion that is needed to be invested in the renewable energy sector. Right now, only 2% of investments are being directed into Africa. What is needed to increase that percentage to something that would be far more significant and impactful?
First, let me thank you for being here on this panel, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the amounts that are needed for renewable energy in Africa are huge. Just as we speak, even before the crisis, the COVID crisis, I mean, 3 years ago, we were talking about a funding gap of about 90 billion. Imagine now, I mean, that this number has a year, 90 billion every year. Now, this number has increased tremendously over the last period, and especially now that we talk about energy security. What needs to be done? There are things to be done at the domestic level and others to be done internationally. At the domestic level or at the national levels, our economies within the continent are trying to, improve the investment climate, because after all, I mean, we cannot dissociate investment in renewable energy from the investment climate within a country. This is one. Two, what we are trying to do at the African Union is to create a larger markets, because we are 55 fragmented small economies. So to create, economies of scale, projects at scale, and we have an active pipeline with even grants for the preparation of those projects in order to have them ready for investors. third element is the human element. Remember, it's not just about the investment. You want to make sure that there is the human element that is able to install, operate, maintain whatever project. So that's a third angle that we are talking about. And the fourth is to mobilize African resources. This is what we're doing through our Africa 50, and even the Ban project here in Egypt has benefited from funding, from local funding, private businesses and private and African investors here in Ban. Now, on the international side, there is the cost of money, which is still really a hurdle for Africa. Africa is wrongly perceived as a risky region, and this is not substantiated by data, which means that even in the credit rating, we are rated much less than, say, similar European countries, and which makes the cost of borrowing for us is 9-10%, whereas in similar or worse economies that would be 1 or 2%. So we want to look into that. The other aspect is green funding, which is really important now for renewable energy. We're seeing lots of green funding growing around the world, and we are determined to have 1 or 2% of that, which could very quickly cater for our renewables need. And last week, we launched the African Green Infrastructure Alliance, together with the African Development Bank, together with Africa 50, together with the Rockefeller Foundation, several multilaterals, several institutional investors, in order to prepare projects for the offtake by investors on a solid ground, and also with instruments to mitigate risks and make the investment palatable for investors. And of course, we continue what we do on harmonization of policies and regulations in order to make it easier also for investors to implement those projects.
Thank you. And you raised a couple of really interesting points. One is addressing those perceived risks and cost of capital, but also keeping people at the center of the energy transition is really key. And it's not just about consumers, it's also about the workforce. And I think that that's an interesting topic we can talk about a bit more later as well. Welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to find us here. It is kind of a maze to find your way around here. So I would like to welcome Eamon Ryan, the Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, as well as the Minister of Transport in Ireland. Welcome. I'll let you get your bearings a bit, and then I'll come to you with a question after going through a few more of the panelists. So, Leo, welcome. AES is becoming a leader in providing around-the-clock carbon-free electricity to corporations like Microsoft and Alphabet. I would love to hear from you a bit more about that and what are the opportunities and challenges of this business model.
Thank you, Kristen, and happy to be here. So AES, just to give some context, is a global power company. We are signing about 5 gigawatts of renewable PPAs a year. We have a pipeline of 60 gigawatts of projects to be built. And last year, we were ranked #1 by BNEF in selling renewables to corporates globally. And the way we establish this leadership is with these types of innovative products. But just to give some perspective on the corporate market, just 5 years ago, the RE100, which are the corporations that committed to 100% renewable energy, they were 85 companies. Today, they're 500. So the corporate market has been exploding. Not only the number of companies that have committed to 100%, but they're going from scope 1 to scope 2 and now to scope 3. So they're going deeper in their requirements as well. When we approached the large tech players with this idea of the round-the-clock energy, none of them really had an hourly carbon-free goal. All of them wanted to have 100% renewable on a volume basis for the year, but they did not plan to match the renewables with their load. And Google was really the pioneer in this, so we worked with them for about a year and a half to create a product that actually matches the renewables on an hourly basis with their data center load. And what was the reality for these corporates? It's the reality today. Some of these were signing 100 PPAs in a year with multiple projects. And each project has their own permitting issues and interconnection issues and their own intermittency. So it is not efficient to sign so many PPAs. So when we approached Google, we said, let's take your data center, a large data center, and let us provide all the power to that data center, and we'll build all the projects behind that. So we looked at thousands of combinations of projects to do the perfect combination between wind, solar, and energy storage to create a firm load for Google. And we brought 10 projects online behind that. So we brought wind, solar, even small hydro, and energy storage, 500 megawatts to provide the load to that data center. And we assured that 90% of the hours it would be carbon free. So this is a new model that we launched about 2 years ago. And then we went on to sign double that volume with Microsoft and now 3 times that volume with Amazon. And we think this is the trend because what customers want, what society as a whole wants is carbon free all the hours of the year, not some hours renewables and some hours carbon intense. So we think this is a trend that will eventually touch all the corporate customers.
Thank you. Okay, Claudio, on to you. Can you share a bit with our audience, what is your vision for the future energy system? What is that going to look like? What is the role of clean power and electrification in that future energy system?
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. This is the clean energy and electrification. And the way we clearly see the future of the energy system is that we will have electricity as the backbone of that future energy system that needs to be decarbonized. And from an engineer perspective, direct electrification is the most efficient way to use primary energy. Now that means, and you mentioned this at the beginning, right, that we need to take something that is around now 20% of the mix in this energy system equation all the way up to 80% from an electrification standpoint. And that takes 2 parts. First of all, where we generate and how we generate that electricity, of course, in clean manners. Great examples came up just before that. Renewables, of course, and some complements, as long as that technology helps decarbonizing the energy system. On the consumption side, as you mentioned, and we'll hear more certainly later on, is we have to push electrification in other sectors, in transport, in industry, in buildings. And for that, we will then deal with a more complex system. But as the technology evolves, particularly on the digital side, we see that there is plenty of technology available today to drive that journey and to scale the deployment of that technology. There is no doubt about both as a backbone of that electricity system. We have technology today that is deployed also in Africa in many areas, high voltage direct current technology, but also very important, and Amani mentioned the fragmentation of the market, but also in a continent like Africa, there is a lot of technology available today that can give reliability, resilience of that access to electricity at the edge of the grid, creating microgrids with local storage, local solar power generation. And I think we as a industry, we need to look at all those building blocks and make sure that we, from a technology standpoint, we make everybody understand which is the right priorities. Our view is that for a continent like Africa, we have to push more at the edge to start with and get rid of the almost 1 billion people that don't have today access to electricity. That should be a priority, but at the same time, we have to invest in the infrastructure. We have to invest in infrastructure, and to deal with the scale topics, Leonardo just made a good example. We will have to work from a financing standpoint, from a government standpoint, and creating policies that will allow, for instance, countries in Africa to interconnect and deploy then all the tons of available clean energy that they have, whether it's wind, solar, hydro, and many more to come, and geothermal, and many more to come.
Thank you. So tackling that fragmentation through all types of technology, through more interconnection and more collaboration is key. Minister Ryan, thank you for being here. I saw a recent quote from you saying that efficiency, renewables, and electrification are the primary weapons in reducing private energy import demand. Perhaps you can share a bit more on this and maybe connect it to Ireland's big plans to have 7 gigawatts of offshore wind in place by 2030.
Well, thank you very much, and apologise for being late. I was actually delayed at the European coordination meeting rather than getting lost. But we're in the middle of the negotiations, or starting the negotiations as ministers. All the focus is on loss and damage, correctly, but we need to keep the focus as well on mitigation and on the real opportunity that exists for a new industrial revolution, which is starting, which is happening. And I always simplify that right down to kind of what is the core of this more dispersed, decentralized, diffuse energy system, renewables, compared to the centralized, dense fossil fuel alternative. And the characteristic of this revolution is a balancing between variable supply and variable demand. And the image I have in my mind is in Ireland we have a traditional dancing to Irish music where you have 8 people come together and they come in, they come out, they go round, they swirl around together. And that's the image I have in my mind, because if you look at all the players, what you say is, so you have generation, new renewable generation, which is the most cost-effective, cleanest. Everyone has access to it in different countries in different ways. So it has real advantages in its, and there's so many forms: solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, biomass. So it has real advantages, but it is variable. But there's other dancers. Storage is part of that, because that's a form of generation which gives you timely backup. Interconnection. In an island like Ireland, it's critical. We have a large renewable resource, but to balance that in this dance, we are going to connect now again a new connection to England and a new connection to France, which HVDC cables, where you can transfer power long distances at low losses. And that's very important. But then on the demand side, and I absolutely agree, for us, a large amount of our demand is data centers and growing. There, it's exactly what you say, that we look to bring power close to the data, so people are self-generating, and that they locate and that their operation supports the grid. Because really the difficulty, the real challenge in this is very technical around grid stability, in providing inertia, to push the power down the lines, voltage and frequency stability, as well as generation at all times. And then in that, there's also in the use side, in the demand side, in transport, this great advantage of electric vehicles, more efficient, so, and as a potential store for energy, or a use of that energy in the middle of the night where we don't have other demand for it. It's so important that we move demand to the times when the renewables is available. And I think in heat, it's similarly, I think electric vehicles and heat pumps are the two key technologies developments, because there's an efficiency gain in both. Heat pumps, not just for domestic, but also in my mind now for industrial heat use under 200 degree temperature requirements you might have. Industrial heat pumps as well as domestic heat pumps are a real potential. So we have currently 5 gigawatts of onshore wind. In Ireland, in the last 2 months, that's provided about 50% of our supply. It goes up to 75%, which is the real cutting edge, because then you're getting into the laws of physics are demanding around that voltage stability, frequency, and inertia issues. We now go offshore. 5 gigawatts that will be feeding into the grid in a standard way to meet our needs, but also in our auction systems, which start next month. We will be looking to give a potential for businesses to bid in on a power to X So if it's where you're taking some of that offshore demand and perhaps you're using it to create ammonia for transport or hydrogen for industrial use, or even as well to work with companies to say, you use some of this as part of your hourly system and have other backups to give the 100% round-the-clock services. And I think in that auction system where people bid in to use the power in the best way, that will help that dance between variable supply and variable demand. Sorry if that's abstract, but that is what we need to do, a big dance.
You have left us with an amazing visual of what the future energy system is going to look like, an Irish dance. Supply and demand dancing together. And I think that what's really important here, though, is really focusing on the demand side stepping up and playing a much more active role in the transition. And the role of the interconnection and the grids, the investment in transmission and distribution that is needed all around the world. Now, at the World Economic Forum in January, we are going to be launching a clean power and electrification accelerator. Now, the idea behind this is that that so much is happening right now in different parts of the world that can be replicated and really be used to accelerate far more action on tripling clean power and moving to far more electrification. Now, I want to shift to this topic about accelerating actions. And I'm a former power plant developer with AES, in fact. And back in the day, it was just accepted that it would take years to get a project from idea through permitting, through regulatory processes to construction. It was okay that it took, or maybe not okay, but just a given that it would take 5 years to 8 years to get a project online. And given the timeline, given the fact that we need to triple power supply by 2030, that is no longer acceptable. So I want to shift to what, both on the supply and the demand side, what are those accelerating actions that are needed? And Leo, I'll turn to you to talk about this first. What are those key bottlenecks and what are the solutions that will help solve for this?
Thanks. I think that's a great point. The demand today is exploding. So even if governments are not moving fast enough, these corporates will drive this, right? So in the U.S. today, half of the demand is from corporates, half is from utilities. So I agree with you that the demand is there and is growing. What are the bottlenecks for projects? In the old world, each individual power plant was going to cost $2 billion, $3 billion. So it was okay to spend years developing that, and by the time you were done, you had that massive amount of supply. The renewables, they are scattered and dispersed. So as an example, I have today 400 projects in development in the US. In the past, you would have 2 or 3 projects in development in a country, but now you have hundreds. Each of these projects have to go through a list of permitting on a local, county level, then state level, then environmental level, then federal level. There's so many things that can kill each project. The interconnection process, in each country, you have your own rules, but they may take 2 or 3 years for interconnection studies to come back for each project. And this is not even talking about the land side. The land, some of our projects, we have to deal with 25 landowners. 25 different landowners you have to negotiate to build the wind, to build the solar. So that doesn't allow for scalability. So today there's more demand. Any project I have, I can sell because there's so much corporate demand. But the projects are not moving fast enough. So what we need for each country is streamlined rules for permitting and for interconnection. What are the streamlined rules that will align and make the process way faster? Make the process 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years. And each country has to formulate their own because they have their own restrictions. But without that, I think we'll never get to the scale we need.
Commissioner, is it the same in Africa?
Yes, it is it is the same to some extent, but I wanted to answer your question very directly about what is the best accelerator. The best accelerator is the crisis. I think the pressure is so much on everyone, whether you are a politician, whether you are a private sector, whether you are a bank, to ensure that this is happening and very, very fast. In everyone's priority, the first thing is energy security. And the best energy security we could have are twofold. One is renewables. It's everywhere. I mean, for us in Africa, we are endowed, so it's throughout the continent. It's available everywhere in all its forms. And the second, also untapped resource, is what His Excellency started with, is efficiency. And efficiency is the greenest of energy. Through Africa, the Commission for the African Commission for Energy, Southern Africa could save like the equivalent of $9 billion through the program that we have put in place just from energy efficiency. We are substituting the grid into smart grids throughout the continent because the wastage is about 20 to 40% from that. And nothing can be done without digital meters, without smart data, very timely, and this is why we're doing the work that we're doing in terms of the information system for energy. But going back to your question and also linking it up what was said earlier about the fringes, the microgrids, I would like us please to be careful about that. Africa's ambition, and now more than ever, has never been to put a light bulb in a hut. This is not the ambition. This could be maybe for a remote village or for a small community, but the scale we are talking about here, and it was mentioned here, we're talking about massive investments in renewable projects in order to generate also other forms of fuels that are very much needed as we speak. And now that I don't want to delve into green hydrogen, but Africa now is poised and is preparing for the production of 5,000 million tons of green hydrogen every year, and this will not come from microgrids. So that's why the massive renewable energy in solar, or like in Northern Africa, and then and even in geothermal in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, is coming, from massive investments in renewables. There is no solution fit all. It depends what purpose that you are building for, but microgrids, that's fine. Yeah, please keep doing that, but knowing that this is not also what is at the core of our interest and concern now. We want energy at scale for the continent. We want energy security. We want to use it also to produce other forms of fuel as we speak. And it is being done as we speak, actually, as well, in this very country. So this is what the other aspect, and I'll go back to the integration. Creating an integrated market like we're seeing in Europe and what Ireland is doing to do, we are doing the same thing in Africa. We launched that last year, a single African electricity market. It's a very ambitious program, if not just a project, linking generation to transmission to harmonized policies, regulation, to be operation 2040, and I dare say even before 2040, given the crisis that we are living. So here, I think we have to understand that the potential within Africa is huge. It's huge. The resources are available abundantly, and climate finance, green finance, is in trillions around the world. We just want 2 or 3%. We'll bridge the gap in no time. And Africa has demonstrated that even within the last few months, during this crisis, we jumped into the occasion. We rode the wave, and we are into productions. 8 countries producing green hydrogen, 4 producing sustainable aviation fuel. So we're moving forward. We have to do that fast and at scale. Thank you.
Thanks. Claudio, do you want to comment on anything Commissioner said?
Absolutely, and it's good that you bring up the point. Microgrids it's a technology that it's also needed and deployed in developed economies and in markets like in Europe and so on. The point is simply that any technology that is available today to help decarbonizing the system needs to be deployed. We cannot be selective on that. And there is times where it's better to work at the edge first, to get access to electricity, while then working on planning, permitting, and so on to build the infrastructure behind. What I think it's an opportunity for all of us is that we have gone through a lot of those learnings in Europe, in other parts of the world. Minister mentioned quite well a number of challenges that the entire energy system needs to deal with because of this increased complexity, the stability topics, and in order to address that, there is flexibility that you need to inject in the system. Flexibility comes from managing at the edge demand response. Flexibility comes from interconnections that he was also mentioning. And one last point, it is a more complex system that we need to deal with, but technology is there. There is no concern about securing that future energy system that will be electrified across the sectors with clean energy sourcing will deliver even better resiliency, even better availability and affordability. If we do it approaching with innovation also on the way we collaborate, the way we chip in with financing, the way we understand that investing in decarbonizing the infrastructure in Africa, it's way cheaper than doing the last bit in parts of Europe, for instance. So there is a lot that we all need to contribute, and I like very much the example Leo brought up, where creating scale and proposing solutions to, in this case, companies, and that can work also for countries in Africa.
Thank you. Minister, is there, I liked what the commissioner was talking about, that the energy crisis is the great accelerator for the clean energy transition. Do you find that that's the case in Ireland, or is there anything else that you want to comment on?
I think it is in Europe, but can I pick up what the commissioner said on two things? Firstly, I think that idea, vision of an African single electricity market is very powerful. I wish in Europe that we had a single electricity market. We do in name, but in working functional system. So we all have to work together on this, and Africa might be able to take a jump. But also, I think I heard you saying earlier on about the cost of interest rates for capital. This is a big capital investment transition. It's all upfront. The marginal cost of the fuel is zero, but the capital cost is high. And bringing down the capital cost is absolutely critical. There are various elements to that. Firstly, to go back to the negotiations, as I mentioned earlier, I think it was, the Prime Minister for Barbados saying at the start of the week that the developing world is paying 14%, the developed world less than 4%. That's a first fundamental thing we need to address. And I think that's true what the Maldives are saying. We need a mosaic of climate finance solutions. Yes, we need all sorts of funding arrangements for loss and damage, but we also need reform of the MDBs, of the financial capital markets, so that the capital cost for Africa and other developing countries come down, first and foremost. But also then within that, I was speaking to Mary Robinson the other day, our great former president who fights for climate justice, and she makes the point that a lot of countries, these big mega renewables projects, run the risk of losing local communities. And we do need to make sure that we approach this in a just transition way where there is benefit to local communities, there's respect for local agriculture and local biodiversity. And I think if we get that right, it will be much easier to streamline the permitting system. And we do need to streamline and speed up the permitting system. And the highest cost of interest rates in many instances is the political risk, planning risk, environmental risk behind projects. So when you work with nature, with local communities in the permitting, that is one of the important ways of us being able to streamline the permitting system as a way of bringing down the capital cost. We need to do it globally at events like this, and locally in working with local communities and governments.
That is such an important point. That is bringing in people and communities to the transition to help accelerate the permitting, but also to ensure that the transition really is in the direction of just, and we're aligning the just transition along with the climate ambitions, along with energy security. And we're at the close of time, but I do want to give each of you 30 seconds each to just share with the audience what's the key accelerator for you in your perspective, from your business or from where you're sitting in government.
So I'm from with the private sector. So I think this for us is the group of regulations and streamlining the process so we can deploy renewables at scale. Just as a note on scale, right? The U.S. today has 700 gigawatts of thermal projects. We'll need 3,000 gigawatts of renewables to be built. We're building 30 a year. So that would mean 100 years to get to the end of this journey. That gives you an idea on what needs to be done to scale to go from where we are today to where we have to be.
Thank you. You were not here, Minister, but I said we created the instrument to de-risk the projects, to ensure their bankability, to ensure their attractiveness to the private sector. We launched that last week. We are eager to continue our massively and fast scaling up access to electricity everywhere in the continent and to all Africans, and there is no one solution that fits all. We have diverse countries, and within each country there are diverse communities, and we are taking all of the solutions. We are not stopping at anything, and we are tailoring the technology and the solutions to our needs and communities. Having said that, Africa is poised to be, and it is already, but it's poised to be the largest continent in terms of production of renewables and for domestic use, I mean, within the continent, but also for export, this and fuel. So if you're an investor, if you're a technology manufacturer, this is the time to be in Africa now.
Thank you. And from my side, just to conclude, I think we have a good initiative at the WEF, and Kristen, you've been working hard on this. Is to have a system value approach and build a framework around that. It is important for all of us. There is no way that we can solve this scaling, as Leo was mentioning, on the traditional model. We do our part as technology providers. Government does their part as policies and so on. We have to work across. We have to be able, each and every one of us, to understand the full system perspective. And then there are frameworks that will help in taking into account what is the best priority, what is the best return for the investment, and of course making sure that everyone is involved in this transition.
Yeah, no, Leo reminds me that the scale of the increase we need in all our countries is beyond compare. People don't understand how big, if we're to meet our targets, and it's very much the supply chain, and it's in cables, in turbines, smart meters, electrolyzers. It's and this technology is all developed. We're not waiting for some new technological development, but how we scale up the industrial production of those basic components of the new industrial revolution is the real challenge. And as Nicholas Stern says, we need to go from billions now to trillions in that approach, and that will bring down the cost. It'll be a virtuous loop. As we scale up, the price becomes better and better. But the scale of the scaling up, people should need to be honest about it. It is a leap we need to make.
I would like to thank our panel. Thank you so much for sharing with our audience the magnitude of the challenge, but also that real actions are being taken to get there. And that's really inspiring. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to our audience. Have a great day.